All prisoners were about to be executed, but the little princess pointed at the human. The relentless downpour hammered the execution plaza like bullets against armor plating. Commander Michael Caine knelt in the mud with 17 other condemned souls, shackles biting into his wrists as icy water streamed down his shaved skull. 3 days ago, he'd been running contraband medical supplies to refugee camps. Now he was about to die on this godforsaken trade world for the crime of giving a damn about people who couldn't afford to live. "Fucking perfect," he muttered, spitting rainwater from his lips. The executioner's platform loomed ahead, a grim monument to Reyna's brand of justice. Local authorities had rounded up every smuggler, pirate, and black market trader they could find, deciding to make an example that would echo across the sector. Michael had seen worse ways to go, but he'd be lying if he said he wasn't pissed about the timing. Above the crowd of onlookers, a covered viewing platform sheltered the planet's visiting dignitaries. Through the rain, Michael caught glimpses of elegant figures in dark robes, off-world diplomats here to witness Reyna's commitment to law and order. Among them stood a striking blue-skinned woman, her elongated head tails draped gracefully over her shoulders, white patterns marking her as someone of considerable importance. Two smaller figures huddled beside her, seeking shelter from the storm. The herald stepped forward, his voice cutting through the rain as he began reading the death sentences. Standard procedure: crimes against interplanetary commerce, a violation of trade sanctions, conspiracy to undermine lawful authority. The usual bureaucratic bullshit that meant they were all about to die for helping people who needed help. Michael flexed his shoulders, testing the give in his restraints. Not much. The guards knew their business, and escape wasn't looking likely. He'd made peace with worse odds before, but something about dying in the mud on a planet that smelled like industrial lubricant and broken dreams stuck in his craw. That's when the small voice cut through the rain and the herald's droning recitation. "Mama, that's him! That's the man who saved me!" Every head in the plaza turned toward the sound. One of the blue-skinned children on the platform was pointing directly at Michael, her small finger unwavering despite the storm. The herald stopped mid-sentence, confusion rippling through the crowd like a shockwave. Michael stared up at the child, memory flooding back. 3 days ago, before his arrest, he'd been in the market district when a building collapse trapped dozens of civilians. He'd pulled survivors from the rubble for hours, including a terrified blue-skinned girl who'd been crying for her mother. He'd carried her to safety and disappeared into the crowd before anyone could thank him. Apparently, someone had been watching. The elegant woman, the child's mother clearly, stepped forward to the platform's edge. Even from this distance, Michael could see the conflict playing across her features. Her composed diplomatic mask was cracking, revealing something far more human underneath. The rain continued to fall, but the plaza had gone dead silent except for the steady drumming of water on stone. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. "I invoke the diplomatic sanctuary clause under the Galactic Trade Accords." Elura's voice rang across the plaza, cutting through the rain like a blade. "This human is now under my personal protection as a material witness to crimes against civilian populations." The herald's jaw dropped. Magistrate Corvin, a thick-set reptilian with scales that glistened in the downpour, stepped forward with obvious displeasure. "Regent Ilura, with respect, this is highly irregular. These prisoners have been lawfully sentenced under Reyna jurisdiction, and I am invoking my diplomatic prerogatives under interplanetary law," Ilura replied, her chin raised defiantly. "Unless Reyna wishes to face sanctions from the Diplomatic Council for violating treaty obligations." Michael watched this exchange with growing amazement. The blue-skinned woman was putting her entire career on the line for a stranger. He'd seen politicians throw their own mothers under a transport for less. Corvin's reptilian features twisted with frustration. "Very well, but understand, Regent, you assume full responsibility for this human's conduct. Any crimes he commits, any damage he causes, falls upon your head. Are you prepared for such a burden?" Ilura's gaze found Michael across the plaza. Something electric passed between them. Recognition, gratitude, and something deeper that made his pulse quicken despite the circumstances. "I am," she said simply. The next hour blurred past in a haze of bureaucratic procedures. Michael found himself released from shackles, processed through Reina's diplomatic channels, and officially transferred to Allura's custody. The other prisoners weren't so fortunate. Their executions proceeded as scheduled, a grim reminder of how close he'd come to joining them. By evening, Michael stood in the luxurious suite of Reina's diplomatic quarter, still struggling to process his reversal of fortune. The contrast couldn't have been starker. From a muddy execution ground to elegant accommodations, with actual hot water and real food. "The children are with their tutor," Allura said, entering the main room. She'd changed from her formal diplomatic robes into something more casual, a flowing blue garment that complemented her skin tone and revealed more of her graceful figure. "We can speak freely." "About what exactly?" Michael asked, accepting the glass of something amber she offered. It burned pleasantly going down. "About the fact that you saved my daughter's life, and I've just made you my responsibility." She settled onto the couch across from him, her movements fluid and hypnotic. "In my culture, such debts are not taken lightly. And in mine, we don't usually expect payment for doing the right thing." Allura's head tails shifted slightly. He was learning to read her body language. Amusement, he thought. How wonderfully human. "Tell me, Michael Caine, yes, I know your name now, what drives a man to risk his life smuggling medical supplies to refugee camps?" "Same thing that drives a diplomat to throw away her career for a stranger, I'd guess." He met her gaze steadily. "Sometimes you can't live with yourself if you don't act." "Fascinating." She leaned forward slightly and he caught a hint of some exotic perfume. "On my world, such decisions are made through careful deliberation, weighing all possible outcomes. Humans seem to operate on pure instinct." "Works for us." Michael found himself studying the elegant curve of her neck, the way her white markings seemed to glow in the soft lighting. "Though I have to ask, what exactly does being your responsibility entail?" "That depends entirely on you." Her voice carried a note he couldn't quite identify. "Renan law requires that you remain in my custody until the diplomatic mission concludes. We'll be sharing these quarters for the next several weeks." The implications hung in the air between them. Michael felt that familiar tightening in his chest, the same feeling he got before a dangerous run through hostile space. Except this danger was entirely different. "I should warn you," he said carefully, "I'm not exactly used to diplomatic protocol. I might embarrass you." "I doubt that." Allura's smile was enigmatic. "Besides, I find human directness refreshing. My people spend so much time dancing around subjects that we sometimes forget what we're actually discussing." "What are we discussing?" She stood and moved to the window, gazing out at Reina's neon-lit skyline. "Gratitude, responsibility, the strange circumstances that brought us together." She glanced back at him. "The fact that I find myself inexplicably drawn to a species I've only read about in diplomatic briefings." Michael set down his glass and joined her at the window. Standing this close, he could see the subtle patterns in her skin, the way her breathing quickened slightly when he moved near. "Inexplicably drawn?" he asked. "Perhaps not so inexplicably." Her voice was softer now. "You risked everything to save strangers. You showed mercy when you could have simply walked away. These are qualities my people value highly." "And what do humans value that your people might find interesting?" Allura turned to face him fully, and suddenly they were very close indeed. "Passion," she said quietly. "The willingness to act on feeling rather than calculation. The courage to want something and pursue it without endless deliberation." The air between them seemed charged with possibility. Michael could feel the warmth radiating from her skin, could see the rapid pulse at her throat. "Allura," he said carefully, "I need to know, is this gratitude talking? Or something else?" Her hand came up to rest against his chest, and he could feel his heart hammering against her palm. "Does it matter? We're both adults. We're both attracted to each other. In my culture, such things are addressed directly. And if I said I wanted to kiss you right now, I would say that human directness is even more appealing than I thought." He cupped her face gently, marveling at the softness of her skin. When their lips met, it was electric, a collision of two very different worlds finding unexpected harmony. She tasted like starlight and promises. And when she pressed closer against him, Michael felt something shift inside his chest. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Well, Allura said, her composure thoroughly shattered. That was educational. Just the beginning of your human studies, Michael replied, his thumb tracing the elegant line of her jaw. She laughed, a sound like silver bells. I have a feeling this diplomatic mission is going to be far more complicated than I anticipated. The best things usually are. The morning brought unwelcome complications in the form of Ambassador Theron Valdris, a pompous centaurian whose multiple eyes seemed designed specifically for looking down on others. He arrived at Allura's quarters with 2 junior diplomats in tow, his expression radiating disapproval. Regent Allura, he began without preamble, the diplomatic corps is concerned about your recent decisions. Michael, who'd been enjoying breakfast with Allura and her daughters, stood politely. I'll give you privacy to discuss. No, Allura said firmly, her hand touching his arm. You're part of this conversation. Ambassador Valdris, meet Commander Michael Kane, the human who saved my daughter's life. Valdris's multiple eyes focused on Michael with obvious distaste. Yes, the smuggler. Regent, surely you understand how this appears to our hosts? Taking responsibility for a convicted criminal undermines our entire negotiating position. He's not a criminal, little Luria piped up from her seat, her white-marked leku twitching with indignation. He's a hero. Michael couldn't help but grin. The kid had spirit. Children should not speak during diplomatic discussions, Valdris said stiffly. On my world, children are encouraged to speak truth, Allura replied coolly. Perhaps that's why we're better negotiators. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a plasma torch. Michael decided to try a different approach. Ambassador, he said, stepping forward with his most diplomatic smile, I understand your concerns, but maybe there's an opportunity here. Your host respects strength and decisive action. Regent Allura demonstrated both by standing up for what's right. That's got to count for something in negotiations. Valdris's eyes swiveled to examine Michael more carefully. You presume to understand interplanetary diplomacy? I understand people, and I've spent enough time in hostile negotiations to know that showing backbone usually gets better results than rolling over. How refreshingly direct, Valdris said, though his tone suggested he found it anything but refreshing. Tell me, human, what exactly do you bring to this mission besides complications? Before Michael could answer, Allura's elder daughter Kira spoke up. He brings honesty, and he makes Mama smile more than she has in years. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael felt heat creeping up his neck, while Allura's blue skin seemed to darken several shades. Children, she said carefully, perhaps you should continue your studies in the other room. But Mama, we want to hear more about human customs, Luria protested. Michael was telling us about Earth families yesterday. Did you know human children actually choose their own mates when they grow up, without parental contracts or diplomatic arrangements? Fascinating, Valdris said dryly. And what other primitive customs has our guest been sharing? Michael caught the insult but decided to let it slide, just answering their questions about cultural differences. Kids are naturally curious. Indeed. Valdris turned back to Allura. Regent, I must insist that you reconsider this arrangement. The other delegates are questioning your judgment. Let them question, Allura said, rising gracefully. My judgment saved an innocent man and demonstrated our commitment to justice. If that troubles the other delegates, perhaps they should examine their own moral compass. And after Valdris and his entourage left, with considerably less dignity than they'd arrived with, Michael found himself alone with Allura while the girls attended their afternoon lessons. Sorry about that, he said. I didn't mean to cause problems for you. You didn't cause anything, Allura replied, moving closer to him. Valdris has been looking for reasons to undermine me since this mission began. He believes females shouldn't hold senior diplomatic positions. His loss. You're the most capable negotiator I've ever seen. You've seen me negotiate exactly once. Quality over quantity. Michael reached out to touch one of her leku, marveling at its softness. These are incredible. Do they serve a function, or are they purely aesthetic? Allura's breath caught slightly at his touch. They're sensitive. We use them to sense emotional states, environmental changes. When two of my people are close, they can actually intertwine and share sensations. Show me. She guided his hand along the length of her leku, and he felt her shiver at the contact. Like this. But Michael, you should know, touching another's leku is considered very intimate among my people. How intimate? The kind of intimate that usually leads to... She trailed off, her eyes meeting his. To what? To the kind of connection that transcends species barriers. The air between them crackled with tension. Michael could see the rapid pulse at her throat, could feel the heat radiating from her skin. Elura, he said softly, I need you to know, what I feel for you isn't just gratitude or exotic attraction. You're remarkable, brave, intelligent, and a compassionate. Any man would be lucky to... She silenced him with a kiss that was far more urgent than their first. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. The children won't return for 2 hours, she whispered against his lips. Are you sure about this? I've never been more sure of anything. Her hands found the fastenings of his shirt. In my culture, when two adults feel this kind of connection, we don't waste time with elaborate courtship rituals. Good thing, Michael said, lifting her easily in his arms, because humans aren't much for waiting either. What followed was a revelation for both of them. The differences in their physiology only seemed to enhance the experience, creating sensations neither had imagined possible. Elura's leku responded to his touch in ways that left her gasping with pleasure, while Michael discovered that her people's enhanced sensitivity made every caress electric. Afterward, they lay entwined on her bed, her head on his chest as his fingers traced lazy patterns along her leku. That was, she began. Educational? Michael suggested with a grin. Revolutionary. She propped herself up to look at him. I had no idea physical compatibility between our species would be so complete. Neither did I. Though I have to admit, I was hoping. She laughed, the sound rich and satisfied. Human optimism, it's infectious. Is that a bad thing? On the contrary. She traced a finger along his jaw. I'm beginning to think my people could learn a great deal from humans. About passion, about taking risks for what matters. And I'm learning that alien diplomats are far more adventurous than their reputation suggests. Only the best ones, Elura said with a smile that promised more adventures to come. Outside, Reyna's twin suns were setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. But inside their private sanctuary, Michael and Elura had discovered something that transcended the boundaries of species, culture, and diplomatic protocol. Something that felt remarkably like the beginning of love. 3 weeks had passed since that first night together. Their relationship had deepened into something neither had anticipated. What began as mutual attraction had evolved into genuine affection, punctuated by stolen moments of passion whenever diplomatic duties allowed. Michael had proven surprisingly adept at navigating alien social customs, while Elura found herself constantly amazed by human adaptability. The mornings started like any other, with Michael helping the girls with their Earth history lessons, while Elura prepared for another round of tedious trade negotiations. But something felt different. Elura paused in her morning routine, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. Mama, are you feeling sick? Kira asked, noticing her mother's pale complexion. Just tired, little one, Elura replied, though she wasn't entirely convinced herself. The sensation was subtle but unmistakable, a warmth, a fullness that hadn't been there before. Michael looked up from where he was explaining Earth's moon cycles to Luria. You do look a bit off. Maybe you should see the medical officer. I'm fine, Elura insisted, but even as she said it, a wave of nausea swept over her. She gripped the edge of the table, her leku twitching with distress. That's it, Michael said, standing immediately. Girls, continue your studies. I'm taking your mother to see Dr. Vex. Michael, really, I don't need... Elura began, but another wave of queasiness cut her short. Dr. Vex, the mission's chief medical officer, was an elderly Vularian with 6 arms and an encyclopedic knowledge of interspecies biology. His examination was thorough and professional, though his expression grew increasingly intrigued as he ran his scans. Fascinating, he murmured, studying the readouts. Absolutely fascinating. What is it? Michael asked, his concern evident. Dr. Vex turned to face them both, his multiple eyes bright with scientific excitement. "Regent Allura, you're pregnant. Approximately 3 weeks along, by my calculations." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael felt like he'd been hit by a cargo hauler, while Allura stared at the doctor in shock. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Interspecies reproduction isn't supposed to be viable. The genetic incompatibilities alone. Apparently humans and your people are more compatible than anyone realized," Dr. Vex said cheerfully. "The embryo appears to be developing normally, though I'll need to monitor the pregnancy closely. This is unprecedented in medical literature." Michael found his voice first. "Are you sure? I mean, completely certain?" "The scans don't lie, Commander. Congratulations, you're going to be parents." The walk back to their quarters passed in stunned silence. Once inside, with the girls safely occupied in their study room, Michael and Allura finally faced each other. "Well," Michael said, running a hand over his shaved head, "this complicates things." "Complicates?" Allura's leku were writhing with agitation. "Michael, this is a diplomatic catastrophe. An unmarried regent, pregnant by an alien smuggler? The scandal alone could destroy my career." "Hey," Michael said, moving closer and taking her hands in his, "we'll figure this out. Together." "You don't understand the implications," Allura continued, her composure cracking. "In my culture, pregnancy outside of formal bonding contracts is problematic. An interspecies pregnancy, there are no protocols for this." Michael was quiet for a moment, processing the magnitude of what they were facing. Then, to Allura's surprise, he began to smile. "What could you possibly find amusing about this situation?" she demanded. "I'm thinking about that little girl who pointed at me in the execution plaza," Michael said. "She saved my life, and now we're creating a new life together. There's something poetic about that." Despite her anxiety, Allura felt her heart soften. Only a human would find poetry in a diplomatic crisis. "Only a human would see possibility instead of problems," Michael corrected gently. "Allura, I know this isn't how either of us plan things, but maybe that's not entirely bad." "How can you say that?" "My people will be scandalized. Your people probably don't even know interspecies relationships are possible. And the child..." She trailed off, her hand moving protectively to her stomach. "The child will be amazing," Michael said firmly. "Half you, half me, and probably twice as stubborn as both of us combined." That drew a reluctant laugh from her. "You're impossible." "I'm optimistic. There's a difference." He cupped her face gently. "Allura, I need you to know something. What I feel for you isn't just physical attraction anymore. Somewhere between saving my life and sharing your bed, I fell in love with you." Her breath caught. "Michael, I know it's complicated. I know there will be political ramifications and cultural barriers and 1,000 other problems, but I love you, and I want to face those problems together." Tears gathered in her large eyes. "In my culture, love is considered a luxury. Marriages are arranged for political advantage, bloodline preservation, economic benefit. The idea of choosing a partner based on emotion is revolutionary." "Terrifying," she admitted, "but also liberating." Michael pulled her into his arms, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. "So what do we do?" "I don't know," Allura said honestly, "but I know I don't want to face this alone. You won't have to. Whatever comes next, we handle it together." They stood there for a long moment, holding each other as the weight of their situation settled around them. Outside, the diplomatic mission continued its complex dance of negotiation and protocol. But inside their private sanctuary, two beings from different worlds had created something entirely new, a future that neither of their species had ever imagined possible. "The girls will be excited," Allura said eventually. "They've been asking when you're going to become their new father." Michael chuckled. "Smart kids. They saw this coming before we did." "Children often see more clearly than adults," Allura agreed. "They don't complicate things with politics and protocol." "Speaking of which," Michael said carefully, "what exactly does this mean for us?" "Officially, I mean..." Allura was quiet for a moment, considering. "In my culture, pregnancy creates certain obligations. If we were both of my species, formal bonding would be expected." And since we're not, we're in uncharted territory. She looked up at him with a mixture of fear and hope. But perhaps that's not entirely a bad thing. Perhaps it's time my people learn something about human customs. Such as the radical idea that love might be a better foundation for partnership than political convenience? Michael smiled, feeling something settle into place in his chest. I like the sound of that. So do I, Allura admitted, though I suspect the next few months are going to test that theory thoroughly. Bring it on, Michael said with characteristic human confidence. We've got something worth fighting for now. The leak came from an unexpected source, Dr. Vex's medical assistant, a gossipy Tellarite who couldn't resist sharing the fascinating interspecies development with his colleagues over drinks. By morning, the news had spread through the diplomatic quarter like wildfire. Michael woke to urgent pounding on their door. Through the viewport, he could see a crowd of journalists and diplomatic staff gathering in the corridor outside. Their private sanctuary had become ground zero for the biggest scandal to hit the mission. Shit, he muttered, gently shaking Allura awake. We've got company. Allura sat up, immediately alert. Her leku twitched as she sensed the tension in the air. How many? Enough to make leaving interesting. Michael moved to the window, counting at least a dozen beings with recording devices. Looks like our secret's out. Before Allura could respond, her personal communicator chimed with an urgent message from Ambassador Valdris. Emergency Diplomatic Council meeting. Your immediate presence required. Come alone. Like hell, Michael said when she showed him the message. We face this together. Michael, you don't understand the politics involved. If I bring you to the council meeting, it will only make things worse. And if you go alone, they'll railroad you into decisions that affect both of us. He cupped her face gently. I'm not letting you handle this by yourself. Allura's resolve wavered as she looked into his determined eyes. The human capacity for loyalty never ceased to amaze her. Very well, but let me do the talking initially. The diplomatic council chamber buzzed with barely contained outrage when they arrived. Ambassador Valdris sat at the head of the table, his multiple eyes fixed on them with undisguised disgust. Representatives from 6 different species flanked him, their expressions ranging from shock to scandalized. Regent Allura, Valdris began without preamble. Please confirm or deny the reports that you are carrying this human's offspring. I confirm it, Allura said calmly, her diplomatic training keeping her voice steady. And I fail to see how my personal life affects this mission's objectives. A Rogelian delegate leaned forward, his scaled features twisted with disapproval. Your personal life becomes our concern when it creates a diplomatic incident. The Rhaenan authorities are questioning our moral authority to negotiate trade agreements when our own representatives engage in such inappropriate behavior. Inappropriate? Michael stepped forward, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. What's inappropriate about 2 consenting adults forming a relationship? You will not speak unless addressed, Valdris snapped. This is a diplomatic proceeding. And I'm part of this relationship, Michael replied evenly. That makes me part of this proceeding. Allura placed a restraining hand on his arm, but her eyes flashed with pride at his refusal to be intimidated. The issue, continued a Vulcan representative, is not the relationship itself, but its implications. Interspecies reproduction was thought to be impossible. This development raises questions about genetic compatibility that could have far-reaching consequences for interstellar relations. Or it could represent a breakthrough in interspecies cooperation, Allura countered. Perhaps instead of viewing this as a scandal, we should consider it an opportunity to demonstrate that our differences need not divide us. Valdris's laugh was cold and humorless. Regent, your naivety is showing. The Diplomatic Council has already received preliminary reports from 3 member worlds expressing concern about your fitness for continued service. Your immediate recall is being seriously considered. Michael felt Allura tense beside him. This was worse than they'd anticipated. And what about the trade negotiations? Allura asked. Are you prepared to abandon months of progress because of personal prejudice? The negotiations can continue under new leadership, Valdris replied smoothly. Ambassador Theron has agreed to assume your responsibilities. Theron couldn't negotiate his way out of a wet paper bag, Michael said bluntly. He's been undermining these talks from day one because he profits from the current system. How dare you? Theron began. But Michael cut him off. How dare I what? Tell the truth? You've been feeding information to the Rhenan cartels, keeping them one step ahead of any real reform. Allura's the only one here with the backbone to actually change things. The chamber erupted in angry voices. Valdris pounded his gavel for order, his multiple eyes blazing with fury. That's enough! Commander Kane, you will remove yourself from these proceedings immediately, or I'll have you arrested for interfering with diplomatic functions. Try it, Michael said quietly, but his tone carried enough menace to silence the room. I'm under Regent Allura's protection, remember? And I'm not going anywhere without her. Allura stepped forward, her composure absolute despite the chaos around them. Gentlemen, I believe we're losing sight of what's truly important here. Yes, I'm pregnant with Commander Kane's child. Yes, this is unprecedented, but rather than viewing it as a crisis, perhaps we should consider what it represents. And what is that? Valdris asked sarcastically. Hope, Allura said simply. For the first time in galactic history, two species have proven that our differences aren't barriers. They're bridges. This child will be living proof that cooperation and understanding can transcend any boundary. A younger delegate, a Betazoid woman, spoke up for the first time. Regent Allura raises an interesting point. Perhaps we're approaching this from the wrong perspective. Thank you, Counselor Dexa, Allura said gratefully. The question isn't whether my relationship with Commander Kane is appropriate by traditional standards. The question is whether we're brave enough to embrace a new paradigm of interspecies relations. Michael watched her work the room, using her diplomatic skills to reframe the entire conversation. She was magnificent, turning their greatest vulnerability into a position of strength. Furthermore, Allura continued, Commander Kane's insights into Rhenan black market operations have been invaluable to our negotiations. His presence here isn't a liability, it's an asset. An asset that comes with considerable political baggage, Valdris countered, but some of the venom had gone out of his voice. All meaningful change comes with political risk, Allura replied. The question is whether we're willing to take that risk for the greater good. The room fell silent as the delegates considered her words. Michael could see the calculation in their eyes, weighing scandal against opportunity, tradition against progress. Finally, Counselor Dexa spoke again. I propose we table the question of Regent Allura's recall, pending completion of the current negotiations. If she can successfully conclude the trade agreements, perhaps that success will outweigh any concerns about her personal choices. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a reprieve. Michael saw Allura's shoulders relax slightly as murmurs of grudging agreement rippled through the chamber. Very well, Valdris said reluctantly. But understand, Regent, you're walking a very thin line. Any further complications, and the Council will have no choice but to act. As they left the chamber, Michael slipped his arm around Allura's waist. That was brilliant, he murmured. You turned the whole thing around. For now, Allura replied, but she leaned into his touch. We've bought ourselves time, nothing more? Time's all we need, Michael said confidently. We'll make this work. Your optimism is infectious, Allura said with a tired smile. I'm beginning to understand why humans have such a reputation for achieving the impossible. Just wait until you see what we can accomplish together. The arrival of the Thylorian delegation 3 days later changed everything. Michael watched from their quarters viewport as the sleek diplomatic vessel settled onto Reyna's landing platform, its hull bearing the ceremonial markings of Allura's homeworld. The ship was beautiful, all flowing curves and bioluminescent panels that pulsed like a living heartbeat. They came faster than I expected, Allura said quietly, joining him at the window. Her leku were tense with anxiety, the white patterns seeming to flicker in the morning light. Your family, Michael asked. Worse. The High Council. She placed a protective hand over her still flat stomach. They've sent Archon Valen himself. He's my former mentor and the most conservative voice on the council. Michael could see the delegation disembarking, tall, elegant beings with the same blue skin and headtails as Allura, but their bearing radiated authority and disapproval even from this distance. What's the worst they can do? Elura's laugh was bitter. Strip me of my diplomatic credentials, exile me from Thyler, declare our child illegitimate. Take your pick. Before Michael could respond, Kira burst into the room, her young face bright with excitement. Mama, there are people from home here. I saw them from the study room. They look just like us. Yes, little one, Elura said, forcing a smile. Some very important people have come to visit. Will they want to meet Michael? Luria asked, appearing behind her sister. Will they want to hear about how he saved me? Michael and Elura exchanged glances. The children's innocent enthusiasm was a stark contrast to the political storm brewing around them. We'll see, Elura said diplomatically. For now, I need you both to stay with your tutor. Mama has some very serious meetings to attend. The formal summons came within the hour. Michael read it over Elura's shoulder, noting the archaic language and ceremonial phrasing that somehow managed to convey both respect and condemnation. The presence of Regent Elura Velthara is required before the High Council delegation to address matters of grave concern regarding her conduct and the honor of the Thylorian people. He read aloud. Charming bunch. They're not cruel, Elura said, though her voice lacked conviction. Just traditional. They believe in order, hierarchy, the preservation of our cultural values. And I represent chaos incarnate. You represent change, Elura corrected, which to them amounts to the same thing. The council chamber they'd been assigned was smaller than the diplomatic meeting room, but far more intimidating. Archon Valen sat at the center of a curved table, flanked by 4 other council members. His leku were longer than Elura's, marked with intricate silver patterns that denoted his rank and age. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries of tradition. Elura, he said, and Michael was surprised by the genuine warmth in his tone. You look well, despite the circumstances. Archon Valen, Elura replied formally, bowing her head in respect. I am honored by your presence, though I confess surprise at the council's interest in my personal affairs. Personal affairs? Another council member, a stern-faced woman with elaborate ceremonial robes, leaned forward. Child, you carry the offspring of an alien species. This transcends personal choice. It affects the very future of our people. Michael stepped forward slightly, drawing their attention. With respect, counselors, the future you're worried about might be brighter than you think. Valen's eyes fixed on him with laser intensity. You must be the human. Commander Kane, is it not? That's right. Michael met his gaze steadily. And before you ask, yes, I love your daughter. Yes, I'm committed to her and our child. And no, I'm not going anywhere. A ripple of shock went through the council at his directness. Thylorian culture valued subtlety and careful phrasing. Michael's blunt honesty was like a slap in the face. Fascinating, Valen murmured. Tell me, Commander, what do you know of Thylorian bonding customs? Enough to know that what Elura and I have transcends your political arrangements, Michael replied. We chose each other, not because of bloodlines or trade agreements or diplomatic advantages, but because we found something real together. Real, the stern woman repeated disdainfully. And what happens when this your reality conflicts with duty? When your human impulsiveness clashes with Thylorian responsibility? Then we figure it out together, Michael said simply. That's what partners do. Valen studied him for a long moment, then turned to Elura. And you, child, are you prepared to abandon everything you've worked for, everything you are, for this human's love? Elura straightened, her diplomatic mask falling away to reveal the woman beneath. I'm not abandoning anything, Archon. I'm expanding it. This relationship, this child, they represent the best of both our peoples. They represent contamination, another council member spat. Genetic pollution that could... What? Elura interrupted, her voice carrying a steel Michael had never heard before. Create a being capable of bridging 2 worlds? A child who embodies the possibility of true interspecies cooperation? The chamber fell silent. Michael felt a surge of pride watching Elura stand her ground against the most powerful figures in her society. Valen leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "You've changed, Allura. The woman I trained would never have spoken so boldly to the High Council. The woman you trained never knew what it felt like to be truly alive," Allura replied. "Michael didn't just save my daughter's life. He saved mine too. He showed me that there's more to existence than duty and protocol." "And what of your daughters?" the stern woman asked. "What kind of life will they have with a stepfather from another species? What kind of future can you offer them?" "A future where they're free to choose their own pets," Michael said before Allura could respond. "Where they're valued for who they are, not what political advantages they can provide." "Those girls already love him," Allura added softly. "He's been more of a father to them in these past weeks than their biological father ever was." Valen's expression shifted slightly. Surprise, perhaps even approval. "Is this true?" "Completely," Allura said. "He reads to them, helps with their studies, listens to their dreams. He treats them like the precious individuals they are, not like political assets." The Archon was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled before him. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "The Council faces an unprecedented situation," he said. "Never before has a Thylorian of your rank formed such a connection with an alien species. The implications are staggering." "The implications are hopeful," Allura countered. "For the first time in our history, we have the opportunity to prove that our values, compassion, wisdom, the pursuit of harmony, can transcend species barriers." Or, the stern woman said coldly, "We could be witnessing the beginning of our cultural dissolution." Michael felt his temper flare, but Allura's hand on his arm kept him silent. This was her fight now. "Counselor Thera," Allura said formally, "with respect, our culture's greatest strength has always been our ability to adapt and grow. If we allow fear to prevent us from embracing new possibilities, we become stagnant. We become irrelevant." Valen nodded slowly. "Wise words, perhaps there is merit in what you say." The admission sent shockwaves through the other council members. Michael could see the political calculations racing behind their eyes. "However," Valen continued, "the council cannot simply ignore the concerns of our people. If you wish to proceed with this relationship, there must be accommodations." "What kind of accommodations?" Allura asked warily. "A formal bonding ceremony, conducted according to Thylorian law. Your human would need to undergo the trials of understanding, proving his commitment to our ways. And the child," he paused, "the child would need to be raised with full knowledge of both cultures." Michael felt Allura's hand tighten on his arm. These weren't unreasonable demands, but they represented a complete restructuring of their future. "I accept," he said without hesitation. Every head in the room turned toward him. Allura's eyes were wide with surprise and something that might have been love. "Just like that?" Valen asked. "Just like that," Michael confirmed. "I love Allura. I love her daughters. If proving myself to your people is what it takes to build a life with them, then that's what I'll do." 6 months later, the bonding ceremony took place in the gardens of the Thylorian embassy on Reyna, under a canopy of stars that seemed to bless their union. Michael stood at the altar wearing traditional Thylorian ceremonial robes, flowing blue fabric that complemented Allura's radiant beauty as she approached him, her pregnancy now beautifully evident beneath her elegant gown. The trials of understanding had been grueling but enlightening. Michael had spent weeks learning Thylorian philosophy, customs, and language, proving his commitment not just to Allura, but to her entire culture. The final test, a meditation ritual that required him to demonstrate emotional harmony with Thylorian principles, had surprised even Archon Valen with its depth and sincerity. "You have exceeded all expectations," Valen had told him afterward. "Your human perspective brings fresh insight to our ancient wisdom." Now, as they stood before representatives of both their peoples, Michael felt the weight of history settling around them. They weren't just getting married, they were pioneering a new form of interspecies cooperation. "Michael Kane of Earth," Valen intoned, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd, "do you pledge to honor the Thylorian way of harmony while bringing the strength of human determination to this union?" "I do," Michael replied in fluent Thylorian, drawing approving murmurs from the audience. Elura Velthara of Thyler, Valen continued, do you pledge to embrace the human spirit of adventure while maintaining the wisdom of our ancestors? I do, Elura said, her voice strong and clear, her leku glowing with happiness. The ceremony blended traditions from both cultures, Thylorian meditation circles and human exchange of rings, ancient chants and contemporary vows. When they finally kissed as bonded partners, the crowd erupted in celebration that transcended species barriers. Kira and Luria, radiant in their roles as ceremonial attendants, rushed forward to embrace their new stepfather. Papa Michael, Luria cried, using the Thylorian term for father that she'd insisted on adopting. Now we're really a family, Kira added, her mature wisdom shining through her young features. The reception that followed was unlike anything the diplomatic quarter had ever seen. Human jazz musicians played alongside the Thylorian harmony singers, while guests sampled fusion cuisine that somehow made Earth barbecue work with Thylorian spice crystals. Ambassador Valdris, who had initially opposed their relationship, found himself deep in conversation with Archon Valen about the possibilities of expanded cultural exchange. I must admit, Valdris said to Michael during a quiet moment, your relationship has opened doors I never thought possible. 3 new species have expressed interest in establishing diplomatic relations based on the cooperation model you two represent. Funny how love can change the galaxy, Michael replied with a grin. As the evening wound down, Michael and Elura found themselves alone on the embassy's observation deck, looking out at Reina's sprawling cityscape. The planet that had once threatened to execute him now felt like the place where their new life had truly begun. Any regrets? Michael asked, his arm around her waist as she leaned against him. Only that we didn't meet sooner, Elura replied, her hand resting on her rounded belly. Though perhaps the timing was perfect. We both needed to become who we are before we could find each other. Their son chose that moment to kick vigorously, making them both laugh. Dr. Vex had confirmed that the baby was developing perfectly, a healthy hybrid who seemed to be taking the best traits from both species. He's going to be a handful, Michael observed, feeling the strong movements beneath his palm. With your stubbornness, my diplomatic skills? Absolutely, Elura agreed. The galaxy won't know what hit it. They'd already chosen his name, Davin Velcane, combining Thylorian and human naming traditions. The boy would grow up bilingual, bicultural, and hopefully wise enough to bridge the gaps between worlds that his parents had only begun to explore. 3 months later, the birth took place in the advanced medical facility on Thyler with Dr. Vex overseeing a team of specialists from multiple species. Michael had never been more terrified or more excited in his life as he held Elura's hand through the final stages of labor. When Davin finally arrived, screaming lustily and waving tiny fists, Michael felt his heart expand in ways he'd never imagined possible. The baby was perfect, blue-tinged skin like his mother's but with human bone structure, and the beginning of what would clearly become magnificent Leku. He's beautiful, Michael whispered, tears streaming down his face as he held his son for the first time. He's ours, Elura said softly, exhausted but radiant with joy. The news of Davin's birth spread across the galaxy within hours. The first officially recognized interspecies offspring in galactic history had arrived healthy and strong, proving that the barriers between species were far more permeable than anyone had imagined. Kira and Luria were beside themselves with excitement, competing to see who could be the better big sister. They'd already taught Davin his first words in both languages, though at 3 months old, his vocabulary consisted mainly of enthusiastic babbling. "Papa, he smiled at me," Luria announced during one of their daily visits to the nursery. "He smiles at everyone," Kira said with 8-year-old superiority. "But I think he likes my singing best." Michael watched his expanded family with wonder. A year ago, he'd been a smuggler facing execution on a backwater planet. Now he was a father, a husband, and apparently a symbol of interspecies cooperation. Life had a funny way of surprising you. The diplomatic implications of their success continued to ripple outward. The Galactic Council had established new protocols for interspecies relationships, while universities across known space began studying the cultural and genetic compatibility between different species. Michael and Elura found themselves reluctant celebrities, invited to speak at conferences and diplomatic gatherings about their experiences. We're not experts, Michael protested after one particularly overwhelming invitation. We're just two people who fell in love. Exactly, Allura replied, nursing Davin while reviewing the latest batch of interview requests. That's what makes our story so powerful. We prove that love really can conquer the impossible. As Michael looked around their home, filled with the laughter of children, the soft sounds of a baby, and the quiet contentment of a woman who'd become his entire world, he reflected on the strange journey that had brought them here. It had all started with a little girl pointing at a condemned prisoner in the rain. That single moment of recognition had changed everything, proving that sometimes the smallest acts of courage could reshape the galaxy. Davin gurgled happily in his mother's arms, his tiny liku twitching with infant curiosity. He would grow up in a universe where interspecies cooperation was not just possible, but celebrated, where differences were seen as strengths rather than barriers. "What are you thinking about?" Allura asked, noticing Michael's contemplative expression. "Just marveling at how we got here," he replied, settling beside them on the couch. "A year ago, I was about to be executed. Now I'm holding the future of interspecies relations in my arms." "No pressure on the kid," Allura laughed, but her eyes were soft with love as she looked at their son. "He'll handle it," Michael said confidently. "After all, he's got the best of both worlds in his genes, human determination and Thylorian wisdom. The galaxy better watch out." Outside their window, the twin suns of Thylar were setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. It was a beautiful ending to another perfect day in their impossible life. And in the nursery, little Davin Velkane slept peacefully, dreaming perhaps of the bright future that his very existence had made possible. A future where love truly could conquer all.